The hippocampus lies next to the amygdala and the temporal lobe, and that's right here. Amygdala is right here, and hippocampus is right here. And that helps with consolidating information from short-term to long-term memory. So that basically is the memory creation area that we then we can use that memory for later retrieval. So we don't always have to think about it and keep it in our consciousness. And the way that that is done is by frequent stimulation of a neuronal pathway. Frequent is important. So we're going to fire that nerve pathway over and over. And at some point what happens is the receiving neuron feeds back into the sending neuron, and we get a circle going. And it stimulates and feeds itself. That's a reverberating circuit. And that process that then makes us memory is known as long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation. This is why I advocate flashcards, or not really necessarily flashcards, but what I advocate is retrieval exercises, because what we need to do is we need to encode that material that we've understood, hopefully by paying attention, into the storage that we then can later use it. And the way we do that is by having to look for the word, having to think about the word, having to grasp our thoughts. What was that called? What was that called? And then it goes, aha! And then we will remember. And then we make the memory, because we fire that circuit so many times that it becomes the fact that neurons that fire together will wire together. Once that wire's made, we're good. The hippocampus also plays an important role in aggression and behavioral motivation. So this is where we say, I plan to do this, but I don't feel like it. So that's the forehead says, oh, I want to do it. The limbic system, the hippocampus says, nah, I don't think so. And that's where we get the procrastinator cycle coming in. Stop procrastinating tomorrow. And that brings me to the Cingulate Gyrus, and it surrounds the corpus callosum. So that's right here on top. Yeah, that's great. Red on red, huh? There you go, right on top. And the cingulate cortex, which sits in there, helps us express our emotions through gestures and solve mental conflicts when we're frustrated. It links behavioral outcomes to motivation. If it feels good, I want to do it again. Ta-da, is what that means. It's highly involved in depression and in schizophrenia. So it's an important one to understand over time. So I kind of pulled some pictures off that give us like this cortical limbic system is not that understandable, some of it, but some of it is. And so we'll just look at some of these cycles or pathways. That's just for you to reflect on a little. What I think is cool is actually this one, like, you know, where the frontal lobe says, oh, okay, I can do this. I don't have to react back. I'll be fine. And then the amygdala goes like, hell no, I can't do that. And everything escalates. And then the hippocampus says, it will be just like all the other times, because it's got that memory. It remembers that. You know, memory is not just for school stuff. And then the parietal lobe goes back, wow, and that's sort of in the Cingulate Gyrus too. Wow, we can start breathing and we can stop pacing. So we're just pacing around. So we have that change then hopefully happening, that activation of the amygdala becomes less acute. When we freak out, that's below the surface. We want to make it conscious, so then we can think about it and not have a reaction that we then later regret. All right. Most limbic system outputs are relayed then through the hypothalamus, which part acts as a neural clearinghouse for both autonomic function and emotional responses. And so this, a clearinghouse, means it's going to let that energy out. Where it's going to let that neural energy out of anxiety and all that? Well, to glands, to muscles, or to other neurons. And so we're gonna have the hypothalamus send that stuff straight into the body. And if we have a lot of stress, we're gonna get psychosomatic illness from that. So if you're sick, and that includes pain, think, don't make yourself depressed. Obviously, that we're already getting there. But we still have to ask, does that symptom have a message for me? And that's sometimes interesting to reflect on, because sometimes, stress can create all these things that we take medication for, but actually it's only from the stress. I mean, only is actually really a bad way to say it, because it's not easy to change that, but we can. Because the limbic system interacts with the frontal cortex, so there we have a relationship between feelings and thought. And then this gives us a conscious awareness of our emotional richness in our life, but also we can have reason influence emotions through that process. And that's where this mindfulness training stuff comes in handy over time, because we're training that brain, we're training that pathway. From there we go deeper into the brain. We're going to get to the diencephalon. And the diencephalon is on both sides of the hemisphere. The biggest part of the diencephalon is the thalamus. And that's right in here, deep inside the brain, right by the corpus callosum in that area. Thalamus means inner room. We have one bilaterally, and this is an area where we have this is a gateway for all sensory pathways, except that smell that we talked about. The smell bypasses that. It has to go straight to the reaction center, because in lower animals that means life or death, how fast that response goes. But the thalamus is the place where all these sensory things go through before they reach consciousness, the cortical areas. Here we got the brain again. There's the thalamus. The thalamus is big here. If you look at what we just talked about, that hypothalamus, that connection between the emotions and the body, that's actually right down here. So we'll talk about that again next. I like this pathway because we can see this is the pain stimulus that goes in, ping, we step on a tack or something. And then it goes from the receptors into the skin, the pain receptors. It goes up through the spinal cord. There it actually crosses over, and then it goes up the spinal cord on the other side of the body, and then it shows up in the thalamus. And from the thalamus it goes to the cortex. Later on we're going to talk about neural pathways in the spinal cord, and we basically look at 2 neuron pathways or 3 neuron pathways. And the sensory stuff like pain or touch, temperature, is a 3 neuron pathway. One that goes from the side of the irritation to the spinal cord, right here. And then one that's crossing over and goes up to the thalamus, that's the second one. And then a third neuron goes from the thalamus to the cortices. The motor output center is only 2. One goes from the primary somatomotor cortex down to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord level to the muscle. So that's 2 neurons. We'll talk about that later. It's very interesting. Within the thalami, information is sorted out and edited while we begin to have some crude recognition of the stimulus. So I remember, old dial-up internet, and it took like a long time for the picture to come through. In front of that, and below the thalamus, we have that hypothalamus, which consists of some of the most important nuclei in the body. Look at that. All these different colors are all different nuclei right here. Oh, here's the thalamus, remember? There you go, and below there, right there is the hypothalamus. It connects to the pituitary gland, because that's then how it talks to the endocrine system, and that's how the endocrine system then talks to the body. And we'll talk about that in the endocrine system. So go back if you need to remember more on that. The hypothalamus, look at what it all does. It regulates body temperature. It regulates some emotions such as fear and pleasure. It also controls the autonomic nervous system, so all that stuff is controlled. And then the pituitary gland, which is the thing right down here, that's then the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system right there. And then it has to do, so that's that stuff we talked about, psychosomatic illness. And then it has to do with water balance, with appetite, with sleep, and again, that mind-body stuff, that autonomic stuff. I mean, that psychosomatic stuff. The hypothalami are also involved in our biological rhythms and drives, such as the sex drive, and tie our emotions to the physiology of the rest of the body via the autonomic nervous system. That's what we just talked about.